Up next on Coast to Coast, special Hollywood Deaths, Dearly Departed podcast coming up. Mike Dorsey and Scott Michaels joins us. We will be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Well, we talk a lot about podcasting, and we talk about the afterlife on this program. Up next, Mike Dorsey, Scott Michaels joins us as we talk about Dearly Departed. They've got a podcast out that really highlights this. They're both next on Coast to Coast AM. But first, listen to their podcast.
Because I met Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders a few years ago. Mark Lindsay lived on Cielo Drive with Terry Melcher, the producer, who knew Manson. Yeah. That's why Manson knew the house. Then Mark Lindsay moved out, Candace Bergen moved in, then they both moved out, and that's when Sharon and Roman moved in. But Mark Lindsay told me that he and Terry Melcher composed Him or Me and Good Times on the piano in the room, and the house is furnished. Yeah. So the same couch that Terry Melcher was sitting on is the same sofa that Sharon Tate was murdered on. Right. And so the piano was just a few feet from that, and those two amazingly cool songs ended up, coming out of an instrument that was just a few feet away from one of the most horrific crimes in American history. So it's sort of a weird pop culture reference, and that's exactly the kind of stuff he grooved on, He wanted to know what the sheet music was on the piano. Straight Shooter. So, yeah, Straight Shooter and Pomp and Circumstance. Yeah, but then the two songs you told him about ended up in the trailer. Yeah. And then how did you feel when you saw that in the trailer? Well, it's a kick in the pants. You're like, I know that came from me. I do.
So we're going to be back with Mike Dorsey and Scott Michaels as we talk about their Dearly Departed podcast and some of the incredible things and stories they have covered or uncovered on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. George Norrie with you. Let me introduce you to two special guests. First, Scott Michaels, serving as the inspiration for the Eternal Darkness tour on season 1 of the American Horror Story, and was a historical consultant for Quentin Tarantino for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He is an icon in the world of Hollywood death. In 1994, he helmed LA's infamous Grave Line Tours, driving tourists around Hollywood in a funeral hearse. I may have seen him. He also launched his popular celebrity website, findadeath.com, which chronicles the last days of celebrities' lives. In 2005, he launched his own Hollywood tour company, Dearly Departed Tours, which quickly became the authoritative celebrity death source, and is the founder of the Dearly Departed podcast with co-host Mike Dorsey. First of all, let's say hi to Scott. Scott, welcome to the program.
Thank you, George. What an intro. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm looking forward to this, and let me bring Mike in. Mike Dorsey is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, editor, television producer. He's been a frequent collaborator with Dearly Departed podcast host Scott Michaels for more than a decade. Mike made the 2015 crime documentary Murder Rap Inside the Biggie and Tupac Murders, which solves the murders of Biggie and Tupac. Most recently, he was the producer and editor of the paranormal documentary Demon House, starring Zach Bagans from Ghost Adventures. And with Scott Michaels, Mike produced the Manson family documentary The 6 Degrees of Helter Skelter, which BuzzFeed readers named the 4th scariest documentary ever. Here's Mike Dorsey. Hey, Michael.
Hello, thank you.
Looking forward to this, too. And did Biggie and Tupac, some keep saying that Tupac is still alive. Do you keep hearing that story?
All the time. It's mainly just in the tabloids that are looking for clicks. It's pretty irrefutable that he died.
Yeah, I think so too. Tragedy in Las Vegas.
Sure, but he's an iconic figure, and he has a very passionate fan base. So kind of like with Elvis, people don't want to let it go and let him go. So I get why people want to believe he's still alive.
So both your mics will be open, so feel free to jump in at any time. But Scott, what got you to start the Dearly Departed podcast?
Well, Mike and I have been friends and collaborators, just as you said, for about 10 years, and sort of everyone else was doing it. And we had some great stories that haven't been told. Our own sort of slant on Hollywood has really never been touched upon, and we just figured, well, we'll give it a shot, and people seem to respond to it, and we enjoy it. Actually, it's a lot of fun.
How often are you doing the show?
Currently, not as often as we'd like to. Probably we put together about one every about 2 weeks is how we launch, about one new one every couple of weeks.
And for people who want to hear it, how do they find it?
It is on, they can go to dearlydepartedpod.com, and then they can look up Dearly Departed Podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and you can find us on Facebook.
Okay, let's have you guys get more shows to producer Tom. We'll see what we can do for you on the iHeartRadio podcasting.
That'd be great.
That would be terrific. Thank you, George.
It's a great topic indeed. The Hollywood is a great place for these strange and unusual deaths. And you, Scott, and you, Mike, you're right in the middle of all of it, aren't you?
Right in the thick of it, yeah. Yeah, and sort of embrace it. A lot of people run from the subject, but that's sort of where we run to. And yeah, it's the go-to story for me. I love the Hollywood deaths.
Scott, did you find when you started the Dearly Departed tours that there was a great audience for this?
Well, there's certainly a culty audience to it. You know, we've all sort of. Well, it's funny, when I started doing this tour, or I started doing this business, it was back when, you know, people were buying their true crime magazines and sort of tucking them in the back of their grocery bags so no one would see. And now there are 24-hour cable networks devoted strictly to the subject matter. So people have come out of the closet, so to speak. You know, and I was sort of at the forefront of that, most definitely. And people have sort of, well, now the mainstream has jumped on my bandwagon. You know,
that's right.
It's become very commonplace now.
I was just given the address of Marilyn Monroe's house that she was in when she died. I don't even know if it's still around, but do you know anything about that? It was in Brentwood somewhere.
05 Fifth Helena Drive. Sure, it's still there.
It's still there?
Yeah.
Is it eerie when you drive by these places and just kind of stare at the house? Let me tell you why. I go to Denver every month to do our Beyond Belief television show. And in Boulder, of course, that's where JonBenet Ramsey, the poor little girl, was killed. And the driver said, look, you know, before I get you to the TV studio, we're going right by the JonBenet Ramsey house. I want to show it to you. And I'm thinking, oh, my God, do I want to see the house? And he said, look, you're in the news business. You need to see this. And he just says, I'm going to ask you a question afterwards. I said, okay, this is my driver. And he drives me up by the house, and I look at it, and you get the weirdest sensation looking at that house, visualizing and trying to picture the tragedy that happened years before. Do people get that feeling when you take them on tours and they look at these places?
Well, I try to encourage that feeling, actually, because that's what puts a human spin on that. When you're looking at that house, the Ramsey house in Boulder, you're trying to think of imagine the things those walls echoed. You know, the things that home sort of contained, and it's been a fascination for so many people for so long. So, for instance, on my tour, if we're passing the Janis Joplin Hotel, you know, where she passed away, I can point out her room, and people sort of, you know, are fascinated with that. But if you add in that human aspect of playing her music and then looking at that room, that's the emotional impact. That's the part that that's what I go for, because it makes these people into real stories, real humans, not just, you know, record albums or photographs. You could realize the history that happened right there.
Are these places haunted?
Well, I would say some of them are, most definitely. I think so. I think that there are some things, some people just aren't ready to move on. And I do believe that some of these people do hang around. Yeah, definitely.
Interesting. And Mike, when you have worked on the documentary end of a lot of this, of course, have you found it to be strange and unusual on some of these cases?
Yeah, I grew up in a law enforcement family, so I kind of grew up hearing about stories about the strange and unusual things people do to each other. But for me, a lot of times I'm up editing late at night, and so when it's 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and you're in a dark room and the city is asleep, and I'm editing something like Demon House, you kind of creep yourself out in a way. You start thinking that you're hearing things or seeing things out of the corner of your eyes. So yeah, it can get when you're kind of in this world for a long time, it kind of can get to you a little bit.
With your documentary about the Manson family with the 6 degrees of Helter Skelter, what made it one of the 4th most scariest documentaries according to BuzzFeed?
Well, we took audiences to the locations where things happened.
Uh-huh.
And it's interesting. We didn't really focus on the killers so much because they've been, idolized in a way by society and kind of held up, a lot of the focus is always on them, and so we focused more on the victims and where the victims lived, and I think we went to 40 different locations tied to the crimes. And I think that it was once we set it up, and then once you get into the murders, you're kind of primed for it. And we had video footage from inside the house in Cielo Drive before it was torn down that we used with crime scene photos and everything, and it put you there. And we had, some of the Manson recordings, music recordings that they had, we got permission to use. So I think it's the real horror of it. It's a horror film, but it actually happened.
Right. We tried to stay away from the how could this have happened, the homecoming princess turned murderer. We really didn't do any of that stuff. We were very victim oriented, and it was more like this is where it happened and this is exactly what happened, as opposed to the theoretical stuff. And that actually, the horror of the real incident is horrifying enough without adding in all that other business, because we focus on the victims and what they went through as opposed to the killers' lives.
A couple of years ago, I played the recording of Charlie Manson's original audition tape, musical audition tape that he gave to the Beach Boys, hoping that he was going to become one of them. And they, of course, rejected him. And the Beach Boys' original founder and agent, Russ Regan, who's not with us anymore, had a copy of the tape to let us play and listen to. We could not keep it. But it was strange hearing Charlie Manson do what he did. But after they rejected him, he flipped out, and look what happened.
Right. Yeah, that certainly added to the things that were going on in his head at that time. I mean, Manson, the thing about him, he wasn't terrible. He wasn't a bad musician. He wasn't a bad songwriter. He wasn't terrific either, but he was as good as he was not good. And so I can understand how he had some cachet back then. He could have done okay. There were a lot of people that were worse than him that got record deals, and him by him being sort of shunned by the Beach Boys. Well, that did not set well with them, certainly.
Let's talk about some of the favorite LA-based murders and why they're so popular still at this point. Of course, we got to start with Sharon Tate. A tragedy, no doubt, but that's way up on the list, isn't it?
That's my go-to story. I mean, that has been my obsession for decades. I just find that case so fascinating because up until that night of the Tate murders, you thought you were safe in your own bed, and people weren't anymore. Abigail Folger was literally in bed reading a book, wearing a nightgown in bed, and within 30 minutes, she was on the front lawn with 28 stab wounds, and it was unsolved for 4 months. So it changed everyone's comfort level. You were no longer safe in your own house, in your own bed, and it had everything: rock stars and movie stars, and it just drama, and it was a fascinating story, and it's almost unreal. It's almost like it is a movie.
Indeed. What about Frank who is this? Salatry?
Yeah, Frank Saletri. He was a producer. He made some blaxploitation films in the 70s. Blackenstein and was one of them. Kind of a knockoff of Blackula. And he lived in a couple of Bela Lugosi's old homes. And Frank, he actually, one of his paintings is in my shop right now in my museum that his niece gifted me. But Frank was brutally murdered in his home up in the Hollywood Hills, which is bizarrely still an unsolved crime. But the fact that he was immersed in these horror movies and immersed in Bela Lugosi's life and history makes him a really interesting case that has never really been looked at seriously by anyone. It still sits there in the unsolved case file.
And would you highlight cases like this in the podcast, the Dearly Departed podcast?
Definitely. Yeah, it's the odd little stories about people that maybe forgot, but what, for instance, there's a woman by the name of Susan Cabot. She did a film called The Wasp Woman, and that kind of went nowhere. She was a pretty lady, a beautiful actress, we'll say, and she had some interesting romances, and she had a child, and they lived in Sherman Oaks, and she wasn't working so much anymore. But one day her son murdered her with a barbell.
Oh, jeez. And
bludgeoned her to death and hid the barbell in a box of Tide detergent, then called the police claiming ninjas killed his mother, and her son Timothy was actually a medically defined dwarf, and he got away with the crime. He was acquitted because he was on experimental growth hormones. So there's a story for you. And
that's episode 3, I think, of our show.
Yeah, that's right.
Episode 2 or 3, yeah.
The Wasp. What was she? Was a one-time wonder in the movies?
Yeah, but she also, Timothy Roman Scott, who was her son, it was rumored to be he was with her affair with King Hussein of Jordan. So it gets weirder and weirder.
And there's CIA potential involvement in all of that and everything. It's a really bizarre story.
And so her death makes her, interesting to me. Those are the kind of interesting stories that I kind of gravitate towards. The things you didn't know about the things you maybe thought you knew everything about. There's a story, and those are the ones that pique our interest.
What was the silent movie theater murder? What was that?
Well, it was a fascinating story. There was literally a silent movie theater on Fairfax here in Hollywood, and a husband and wife opened it in the 40s. They were showing exclusively silent films. This is a place where Chaplin and Clara Bow would go to see their own films, and it was a wonderful place. Well, the husband and wife who opened it preserved silent films. Ironically, he passed away from cancer from the fumes from the chemicals that he used to preserve the films, and his wife had closed the place up. And then a young student from across the street sort of befriended her by the name of Lawrence Austin and persuaded her to let him operate the theater. So they reopened it with Mr. Austin at the helm. And Mr. Austin had a boyfriend that ultimately became the projectionist. And he was in his 60s, and he loved the place. He would introduce the films. He would rip the tickets and sell the tickets. And one day during the film was called Sunrise, shortly after the film began, a young man came from the theater and asked the candy counter girl if they had advanced tickets for sale. She pointed him to Mr. Austin at the box office, to which he walked up and shot him in the face and killed him instantly. Jeez. And took off running through the theater out the back way. So the crime was unsolved for the longest time, and they had fundraisers and GoFundMe's. It wasn't called GoFundMe's back then, but to bury Mr. Austin and to do tributes for Mr. Austin, and it was a big deal. And people from LA were outraged and disgusted because of this wonderful situation this wonderful sort of landmark was now in questionable future. And it turned out, the boyfriend had hired this young man to kill his Mr. Austin and the candy counter girl, so he would inherit the movie theater. And it's a great story. And also, Mr. Austin, it does still haunt that theater. He is still most definitely hanging around in that theater.
And we're going to come back and talk more about some paranormal experiences you've both had. We'll also talk about the curse of Benedict Canyon. And Scott, I understand you've got a collection of strange artifacts. Let's have you explain those when we come back as well. Mike Dorsey, Scott Michaels, our special guest. We'll take some of your haunted questions next hour with both of them. Their website, dearlydepartedpod.com. That's where you can listen to their podcast. dearlydepartedpod.com, that we have linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. So we'll be back in a moment. Those of you calling, hang with us a little bit. We're going to take calls at the top of the hour. We'll be back. And welcome back. George Norrie with you, along with two special guests, Scott Michaels, Mike Dorsey. We're talking about their Dearly Departed podcast and some fascinating stories of Hollywood, of people who have passed on. We will take your calls with both of them next hour, so get ready for that. Scott and Mike, let's talk more about some of these other based situations. The curse of Benedict Canyon. What happened there?
Well, Benedict is most famous because of the Tate murders, the whole Manson thing. But in my years that I've been studying these incidents around Los Angeles, I put together a list of all the things that have happened at Benedict Canyon. There are like 4 canyon roads that'll take you from Los Angeles over Mulholland Drive to the San Fernando Valley. There's Laurel Canyon and Benedict Canyon and Coldwater. So anyway, Benedict is one of those main arteries. But from the very bottom of of it, where the Beverly Hills Hotel is, which is where the actor Peter Finch died. About a block up is where Thomas Ince lived, and Thomas Ince died mysteriously, they say, on William Randolph Hearst's yacht. Going all the way up Benedict Canyon, I could name so many people that have lived on Benedict Canyon that have died mysteriously. Like, for instance, John Ritter. He lived on Benedict Canyon Boulevard when he died.
That was a sad story.
Extremely sad, and so sudden. And right across the street was where Elizabeth Montgomery passed away. Now, just a little bit further up the road, George Reeves, Superman in 1959, stopped by a speeding bullet to the head. Just a couple of doors down from him was Susan Berman, which is the Jinx murder that he's going on trial for now. Jay Sebring, who was murdered along with Sharon Tate, also lived in Benedict Canyon in the very house that Jean Harlow's husband, Paul Byrne, killed himself in. Rudolph Valentino lived in Benedict Canyon. Brandon Lee lived on Benedict Canyon Boulevard. So all the way up from Sunset all the way to Mulholland, there are at least 25 famous people that have died mysteriously in Benedict, and I'm sure there are lots more that aren't famous that have met their same fate.
Why is that area so haunted? I mean, what do you think may have happened way back to make this start?
Well, my theory is that it is ancient Indian burial ground. It's probably not a PC way to put it anymore, but that's my gut feeling. All of Los Angeles used to be their territory, and I do believe that it was a main artery going across to the valley back then, and probably some people died along the way. Some people think there's some sort of geomagnetic, anomaly underneath the canyon too that makes people behave curiously, but that doesn't explain the people that have passed away in other places. But it's just an odd concentration, because just a mile away is Laurel Canyon, and Laurel is where all the wonderful, the Doors and the Mamas and the Papas and all that business, that all happened very close by. But Benedict has got a real sinister vibe to it, and I never really understood why that hasn't been explored more.
You've been collecting some strange artifacts. Tell us about them.
Well, we do have an artifact museum now.
Oh, really?
Started as a tour, and now we have a proper museum. And I've been collecting these odd artifacts from notorious locations since I was a kid. And for instance, I have a pool from a pool tile from the pool that Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones passed away in. I have a piece of the floor that Bobby Kennedy landed on when he was shot in the Ambassador Hotel. I have the bed that Rock Hudson died in. So it's gone on to bigger things.
Not necessarily just haunted things.
Right. I mean, these are things that are involved with people. For instance, now, one thing I could probably reassemble Sharon Tate's fireplace in my shop, and those stones definitely carry some energy, most definitely. We try really hard to maintain the things we have in our shop, because there's lots of collective awful vibes, and so we do lots of, we do blessings. We use sage, we use salt, and all sorts of different things.
Sure.
But these particular stones need extra care, because there are some real negativity involved with these things, and I've had many psychic mediums come in and go straight for them, saying, "What's that?" So we have some uncomfortable artifacts. Probably the biggest is the 1966 Buick Electra that Jayne Mansfield was killed in. We do have that in our shop.
Oh my God! I remember that as a kid. Didn't she had her head cut off or something? Didn't she?
Yeah, the top of her head actually was sheared off. It was they went under a truck going about 70. The truck was going about 30, and at that point they did not have one of those orange and white striped bars below the rear of the truck. It sits 18 inches off the surface of the road to stop cars from going underneath trucks. And that is nicknamed the Mansfield bar, because that became a law because of this accident.
Was that a driver's problem on their part?
Yes. He was sober, he was well rested, but he was distracted. And it was all understandable what had happened. It was, the driver's error.
And he was a young driver too, I think, right? He was a teenager?
Yeah, he was 19, yeah. So 3 people were killed in the front seat. The 3 children, one who is Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order, she was 3 years old, in the back seat. The 3 children survived, but the 3 in front were killed instantly.
What a horrible story. And John Zaffis, have you heard his name? He is an expert in haunted attached pieces, artifacts, and things like that.
He'd have a field day at our place.
Oh, my gosh. So you have some that are cursed, you think?
Oh, yeah, I do think so. Well, cursed is a strong word to use. I would say there are attachments to them.
Sure.
Now, there are curses that supposedly exist, like Jayne Mansfield was supposedly cursed, or actually her boyfriend, Sam Brody, was cursed by Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan.
He was a Satanist, that's right.
Right, and he invented the whole Church of Satan business, and he was a showman, much like Jayne Mansfield was a showwoman, and they sort of fed off of each other. They'd both do anything for an inch of column space, and unfortunately, Jayne will be forever associated with LaVey because of this. But he took credit for the accident because he says that he cursed her boyfriend, Sam Brody, who was trying to extract LaVey from Jayne's life.
Interesting. Now, some of the creepy places around Hollywood, we've talked about a few, but tell me about the LA County morgue.
Go on, Mike.
Oh, man. We've been in there a few times. We have a friend of ours who used to be their director of operations, Craig, and we got in when we filmed the 6 Degrees of Helter, Skelter, and we've both stood inside the crypt with upwards of maybe 100 bodies around us, and it's not. They aren't in black body bags like what you would see on TV. They're loosely wrapped in clear plastic. So and some of them are just out in the open.
Oh my God!
So it really is. It takes a lot of nerve to cross that threshold from the hallway into the crypt when that door slides open, and to see it's not something you see every day unless you work in a morgue. So just being in the building is creepy enough, but when you go into that room, it's a real house. It's a real life house of horrors.
It really is, and what compounds the whole thing. I mean, visually enough, it's disturbing, and this is going to be a bit graphic, and I apologize if it's too much, but it's the smell. It is the smell that really kicks you in the face. It's just like that.
Regardless of what they've tried to do, you can't stop that.
Right. I used to think it was chemicals, and no, it's not chemicals.
And it's a heavily ventilated, and there's constantly people scrubbing the hallways and everything. Yeah. You can't overcome.
But you can't avoid it, and that's I think something you can't shake. And one time, Mike and I were shooting in in one of the areas where the autopsies are taking place, and one of the poor kids I've never seen anybody physically turn green before. And this poor kid was going to pass out. It takes a strong stomach to be able to sit there and look at that objectively. But
right.
But this poor kid just was a little bit too much for him.
And then that night we took him up Cielo Drive because it was the anniversary of the Manson murders, the Tate murders.
You can't say it was a boring shoot for them.
Now, I bet you've come across some very weird and strange encounters as well, haven't you?
Paranormal wise, sure. I've come up with a couple of interesting incidents here and there. And actually some of them were associated with the Tate fireplace bricks, because I had all these things before I opened my museum. I had so many things in my home, and I never really didn't think anything of it. I just had these things in a cabinet, and I kept them all here. Well, I had this large box of stones from the Tate fireplace in my laundry room, and twice over at the beginning of when I moved into my apartment, I saw somebody standing in the doorway of my bedroom twice. Full figure of a man, just like a shadow, looking at me, and then just turning and walking into the laundry room. And it took me the longest time to put that together, that it had something to do with those stones. And when I got them out of my home, those sort of apparitions stopped happening. But I had a dog that would react to those things too. So I do think that these things, some of these things have a lot of vibes attached to them, most definitely.
What is it about the unusual, the paranormal, that gets so many people interested, fascinated? You've got tours now. Why did people really want this?
Well, I think it's still untapped, territory. It's like death. That's the one question that really nobody can positively answer. And when it comes to celebrities and the paranormal, and sometimes people don't want to let the celebrities go, so they're trying to constantly. Remember when we were kids, used to do seances and things like that, try to contact Mae West or Marilyn Monroe or whichever it was. It was something that sort of a way of mourning famous people by wanting them around. James Dean was another one that people just didn't want to let go.
That's right.
So I think that that's part of the reason, part of the attraction of the famous ghost. But just, paranormal has become such a phenomenon.
I think people are just starting to let go of Elvis, as a matter of fact, after all these years. I mean, these stories what do you think of stories where people die, but people seem to think they're still alive somewhere, that they faked their death?
Well, there's certainly a lot of ammunition for those stories, and people that claim they have sightings. And I think the most convincing one would be the Jim Morrison one, or even Andy Kaufman. He's another one that people say are still around, that if anyone was going to do it, they would be the ones to do it. But Jim went so far as to, say, to make an anagram of his own name and say he was going to live on that name, Mojo Rising. So, mysterious death, unaccounted for bodies. I think that there's a lot of ammunition for that sort of thing.
A couple of years ago, I had two of the remaining doors in the studio, Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger.
Wow.
Ray has since died. But, I asked them specifically. I said, do you think Jim Morrison faked his death? Is he still alive? And they said that he did not fake his death. He died when they said he died. He's not around now. And both of them felt that. But, God, I wanted them to say, we know where he is. He just fell off and didn't want to do it anymore.
Well, and I'm still not convinced, but I still think there's a possibility of Michael Jackson still being around. But like Princess Diana is another one. People are taken away so suddenly that you don't want to let go, and therefore, you keep maybe fabricating more of a life for them. I don't know, but it just seems like so shocking and so likely because Michael Jackson did disappear for so long, to another country and sort of lived incognito. So it just seemed like a real possibility.
What is it about these great talent like Prince, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, great performers who just die too early?
I think a lot of it has to do with boredom, really. When you're creating something like that, like for instance, you put together a record album with, say 15 tracks on it. That is something that we're going to enjoy for years and years and years. But that's a representative of a year or so's work for that one particular person, and they'll be touring on that very same work for the next couple of years. So there's not a lot of creative things flowing. It's like movies. When people are working in movies, you're sitting around for 13 hours out of the day and maybe working for one of them. So it leaves a lot of time, and people are just bored, and they just self-medicate to relieve the boredom. And I really do think that has a lot to do with people dying, of accidental overdoses, just being bored to death, really.
What kind of films are you working on these days, Mike?
Well, we're working now. I think we just passed the 10-year anniversary of our 6 Degrees of Helter, Skelter documentary coming out, and we just got the rights back. So we are, kind of tooling around with that and kind of updating it with new information. And then I'm always developing new projects. So it's a constant. You're either developing something new or you're working on something new. So all mainly crime-based subject matter.
Super.
My passion.
Now, when you give the tours, Scott, I've seen tour buses go by, people sitting there looking at houses and stuff. Is that what they're like?
Well, I suppose so. I mean, we're like a Stars Homes tour. We just do a different spin on it. Where 90% of the tour companies go straight west towards Beverly Hills and the Hollywood Hills, we go straight east to the Black Dahlia and Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
And so we are sort of off the beaten track. There is still an element of oohing and awing over celebrities, but they're not over their hedges, hoping to get a glimpse of them. It's sort of looking at the history of it. That's what we take people to the news, be it older stars like Mae West or Bella, or, we do the Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson thing, too. We have a tour that's devoted solely to the Tate LaBianca murders called the Helter Skelter Tour. And that's 4 hours, just that story. And we have a haunted walking tour of Hollywood, too. So we have a whole lot of different things going on. And people from... we have a good reputation, and people hear about us or read about us, and I'm really proud of that we have the reputation that we do have.
Do you believe that the Tate LaBianca murders are the big drawing card, basically?
This year, certainly, because of all the attention that we've gotten because of my work with Tarantino and the 50th anniversary of the film coming out. And, there was a time where I thought, once the principal people are all gone from this case, and a lot of them are, but some of the killers are still around, I figured once they all pass away, that'll be the end of it. But Tarantino just made everybody infamous.
He sure did. We're going to take calls with both of you in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. Mike Dorsey, Scott Michaels with us. Scott, with Halloween right around the corner, do you do anything special for that?
We have a couple of events at the shop. I wrote a book about the Rocky Horror Picture Show, so I'll be doing a presentation about that. And we have a couple of other things going on. We have a horror movie locations tour that we also offer during the month of October, too, where we take people out to where the famous Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street films were made. So that's always pretty popular, too.
Favorite spooky movie for you, Mike? What is it?
Oh, man, I'm not a huge horror fan, but I would say probably number one would be The Sixth Sense.
I like that one.
I love that twist.
Yes, that's very strange.
I like psychological thriller horror as opposed to, slasher.
That was the little kid who said, "I see dead people."
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's right.
Bruce Willis?
So good.
Classic. How about you, Scott? Favorite horror movie?
I'm an old-fashioned person. Old-fashioned 70s wise. I love Rosemary's Baby. I think that's my favorite.
That was a classic.
Yeah, that's great.
Super, one of the best. Let's take some calls here for you. Let's start by going to Nicole in Arkansas to get us started. Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
Good to have you with us.
Time for like a year to get through.
Perfect timing.
Yes. My question is, I'm a big buff on serial killers and murders because a family of mine was murdered. And I'm curious why y'all chose Charles Manson to do a documentary on.
All right, Mike, let's let you take that. Why'd you do a documentary on Manson's family?
Honestly, because we live around it. That story takes place right. We're kind of in the epicenter of where that all happened. The El Coyote restaurant, the Mexican food restaurant where Sharon Tate and her friends had their last meal the night they died, is right down the street from where I live. So it was just around, and Scott's a big expert on the case already. So it was a natural thing for us to make a film about.
Are you two true crime buffs?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm more of the serial crimes. So that's sort of my thing, the big time ones. But yeah, definitely.
What did you think of Ted Bundy, Scott?
A fascinating man and a conniving man and a charming man, much like Manson, really, but much more sneaky.
Yeah, he was. He'd wear a cast with his standing outside his yellow Volkswagen, would drop his books, and he'd have some college co-ed pick them up and try to help him, and he'd get them into his car and hit him on the head with a wrench.
Oh, it's horrifying.
Yeah, and the Ted Bundy tapes doc series on Netflix is really, really good.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And you look at that guy, and you just wonder what possessed him to be so insane to do that.
Right, and the way he escaped and all that stuff is really wild.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was he just pop out a window. That was crazy. Yeah.
It's almost like Manson, that you can't believe it that all actually happened, but it did happen.
No, it was like the Keystone Cops.
Right.
It's unbelievable. Here's a serial killer jumps out a window of a police office station, and they catch him eventually, but just unbelievable.
Well,
that was at a time when
you don't mind me interjecting, though, just about the Manson thing. We weren't celebrating Manson. We're not trying to, glamorize Manson.
Right.
It's just, it is just part of the history of Los Angeles and L.A. Well, we're obsessed with ourselves here.
Nothing wrong with that. Joe in Long Island, New York, east of the Rockies. Hey, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, guys. Two quick questions. One would be, anything happen on set? Someone was mentioning 3 Men and a Baby. Someone might have been murdered on set. I know that chariot race in the Ben-Hur, supposedly someone was actually trampled, or even a couple of people, and they left it in the film. I'm wondering if there's something that actually happened while filming that's interesting. And also, do you believe that some of these people put stuff in that had an element of truth that we thought was really just fiction? An example might be Eyes Wide Shut. I think that wasn't about Hollywood per se, but it was about maybe the elite, and maybe Kubrick actually met people like that.
Well, as far as like the Three Men and a Baby thing, certain things show up in films that are hard to explain. Now with the internet, it's really easy to explain it, because before we used to watch a movie like The Wizard of Oz, we'd have to wait a year to see it. Now we can just pop it on YouTube or whatever. And there was the story about the Munchkin who supposedly hanged himself in the background of one of the scenes. And now that everyone has this copy on DVD and HD, you can see that it's just a bird walking in the distance, but people still want to remember that Munchkin hanging back there and that they left it in the movie. Now, I know the gentleman is referring to there's a child in a window, like hidden in the curtains in one of the scenes of Three Men and a Baby, and I'm not sure it was a cardboard cutout. I think is how it was eventually explained.
Put in a window or something like that.
It was a cardboard cutout of a figure. I think maybe Ted Danson or one of the actors. Yeah, I can't remember which one it was. That one was debunked, but certainly people have died on film sets.
Scott, are you familiar with the Oman House, O-M-A-N?
Hey, David, yeah, I do know David.
You know David.
Pal of both of ours, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Well, David has a house that's 4 doors down from where the Tate murders occurred on Cielo Drive up in Benedict Canyon. And David's house is only about 20-something years old, and David's house is crazy haunted. I've been in it several times, and I've seen things that have just probably the most absolutely paranormal, things that I've seen more obvious, like things flying, sort of events that happen in his house. So he's definitely got a crazy haunted house there.
And he built it with his father, didn't he?
That's correct, yes.
Back in 1999. So it's not that old. The house isn't that old.
No, but again, it's that whole residue, that whole canyon. He is, literally right across from Valentino's place, and just a couple of doors down from the Sharon Tate place. And yeah, David's house is, it's haunted. I mean, every ghost show that's ever been up there has come up with something, and most of the people swear they won't go back again.
He's in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time?
Depending on how you look at it, yeah, absolutely.
Next up, let's go to Walter in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Walt, go ahead.
Hi, George. I told Tom I hate to call you more than once a week, but I just couldn't help myself tonight.
It's a great subject.
Yeah, it is a very interesting conversation. Why, your guests have already mentioned the late, great George Reeves, the Superman. He was everybody's hero. As you know, George, he was your hero and my hero during the 50s. Yep. And he supposedly took his life after being pressed. He was typecast as Superman, supposedly couldn't get any other parts. Now, George, I either read or heard that he took his own life with the iconic German Luger pistol. Now, I was told, Tom, there's probably no other classification of firearms that has appreciated as much as Lugers. Now, your guest said he has a museum with artifacts, and all I got to say is that if the LAPD still has that Luger in their possession, it would be a priceless artifact. It might be billed as the kryptonite Luger, and in my opinion, it would bring in excess of $1 million at auction.
Well, it probably would.
I'm not sure about the value of firearms like that, but I completely trust what you're saying. And the idea that it has that piece of Hollywood history attached to it is not going to hurt the value of it, not at all.
How do you obtain these items, Scott? Do you have to buy them? Are they donated? How do you get them?
Well, a lot of these things I just got myself, like, pieces of the hotel, the Ambassador Hotel, or the Brian Jones Pool, or the Tate fireplace. These are things that I've got myself. I've acquired them in person. Now that we have a museum, people do send me things a lot. A lot of people had one thing, that they had, well, what am I going to do with this? I carry it around every time I move. So they send them to me. Somebody sent me very recently a piece of some stones from Auschwitz. And then some people sent me something from the Alcatraz dining hall. So then the Queen Mary and all sorts of things just sort of end up in my shop. And I love that. I would say if they tip the country on its side, everything that isn't fastened down will end up here in L.A., and every weird object will end up in my museum.
Do you think George Reeves committed suicide?
That is one thing that I personally do not. I do believe that there was something more going on with his death.
He may have gotten into a fight or something.
Well, he was seeing Toni Mannix, who was the wife of Eddie Mannix, who was one of the bigwigs at MGM that kept things under control. If something were to happen with the celebrity, he would be the guy to call in to sort of keep it on the down low. And George's career was going well. He was not unhappy, like they say. He had an unusual girlfriend at the time, Leonore Lemon. The thing that spells this thing out so strange, George, is that Leonore Lemon was entertaining. George was asleep upstairs. He came down angry because she had these people in, and told him just to calm down. And by the time the conversation ended, he was happy, and he said, "Well, just keep it low, please." And he went back up, and then she said to her friends, "Now he's walking across across the bedroom, and you could hear his footsteps." She says, "Now he's going to open up the dresser drawer," and then she says, "Now he's going to get the gun out," and then you hear the gun. And that really happened. That's in the report.
That's weird. But he did get into an argument with his girlfriend at a restaurant then, right?
That I'm not familiar with. That is a story I don't know.
That's what I heard. So, and then he came back. There was a house full of people there too.
Yeah, it was. There were three. Yeah, and I don't know. It just doesn't sound right. It doesn't, and it usually, it doesn't sound right.
And to the caller's other question about what the LAPD has, there's a really they have a lot of interesting artifacts that they've held on to. A lot of stuff they'll destroy if they can't link it to a crime, but if it is linked to a crime, there's a warehoused evidence. They have some of the stuff from the Tate LaBianca murders there. I know Scott has seen. I think some of that stuff's been even put on display before. And crazy thing a lot of people don't know about is they have the door of Biggie Small's Suburban that was bullet riddled that he was killed in, because they found out that Suburban he was riding in was a rental car, and after it had been processed by the crime scene techs, it was returned to the company, and then the LAPD found out that a body shop had the door, and they were going to try to sell it, and the LAPD went and confiscated the door and put it into their storage. So if you know where to look in the LAPD's archives, you can go see, Biggie's bullet-riddled door on display somewhere. It's probably, on a shelf in a corner or something.
Are both of those murders, Tupac's and Biggie's, unsolved still?
Officially, they're unsolved, yes. But on my documentary pointed out that about a decade ago, an LAPD task force got, credible confessions to both murders. But for various reasons, they're not solvable. Primarily because both shooters in those murders have since died themselves.
Were those shooters hired by somebody?
In both cases, sort of. The one, I believe that the Tupac shooter was a guy named Orlando Anderson that he got into a fight with exactly 2 hours before he was fatally shot. Orlando Anderson was an enforcer, gang, a killer gang member, and he was not someone that you should walk up and punch the way that Tupac did. There's a little more to the story there, but that was him, and he was killed himself over a bad drug deal about 18 months later in Compton, and then Biggie's killer was allegedly hired by many say Suge Knight, or that he was hired by somebody to get basically revenge.
Yeah, and Suge is
that guy was killed back in I think 2003. Same thing, he was murdered in a drive-by.
And Suge Knight's in jail himself for driving over one of his friends at a filming, right?
Right.
Strange times.
He got 20-some years, I think, for that.
Let's go to Linwood, Washington, west of the Rockies. Hello, Diana. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hey.
Great program tonight. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you, dear.
And I used to live in Hollywood, and I was wondering if you know Steve Hodel, who wrote books about the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, we just had Steve on the program this weekend.
Yes. And so what I was wondering, Steve lived in a home that was that looks like the Mayan temple, and I'm curious to know where in Hollywood it was located, and also where is the museum located.
Where's your museum, folks?
Thank you.
All right. Where's your museum, and do you know anything about the Black Dahlia location?
Sure. So my museum is on Santa Monica Boulevard at the corner of Bronson, literally right across the street from Hollywood Forever Cemetery. So I like to tell people you could after the tour, you could make a 20-minute round trip walk to Valentino's grave and make it back to our front door. But so we're right on Santa Monica Boulevard, across from Hollywood Cemetery. Now, she's referring to the Souden House, which was built by Lloyd Wright, who was the son of Frank Lloyd Wright. And that house is on Franklin Avenue near Normandy, right in Hollywood. So it's a very famous house. The exterior of it, like she described it, like a Mayan, sort of like a Mayan temple. They referred to it, or they nicknamed it as the Jaws house, because it sort of looks like the shark from the Jaws poster. And it's been used in lots of movies, The Aviator, and in particular, and they used it in a couple of episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But it's a very well-known house, and according to Steve Hodel, his father probably murdered Elizabeth Short in that house.
Wow, interesting take.
And that's about a block north of Scott's favorite death.
Yeah, Albert Decker, who was a California state assemblyman and actor, most famous for being Dr. Cyclops in the movies, who died in his apartment of autoerotic asphyxiation.
Jeez. Now, the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, lots of notables, right?
Sure. Oh, my gosh, yes. I mean, from Cecil B. DeMille and John Huston and Nelson Eddy to Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland and Chris Cornell and the Ramones. And, yeah, so it's Valerie Harper was just buried there about a week ago. So, yeah, it's still a popular place to be buried.
And for you, Mike, and you, Scott, again, for people who want to watch the Dearly Departed podcast, how do they do that and listen?
Yeah, sure. You go to dearlydepartedpod.com, and then you can look us up, Dearly Departed Podcast, on iTunes and Spotify and Stitcher, pretty much anywhere where you listen to podcasts, and probably find us. And then we also have a Facebook page where we post links to everything.
Super. And you continue to work on projects and tours and things like that. We're going to take phone calls, final calls, when we come back in just a moment here on Coast to Coast. Scott, with everything you've done in this field, which is for you most gratifying?
Well, I'm going to say, being called on by Quentin Tarantino to work on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that to me was the ultimate in validation for my decades of really devotion to this research. And when Tarantino saw Micah and my film, when he called me in and it was sitting on his desk, I thought that was pretty cool. And working with him directly was really an honor. So yeah, I'm not going to lie, that is I'll probably have that on my own tombstone.
Okay, we're going to come back in a moment. We'll definitely take final calls right here on Coast to Coast AM with Mike Dorsey and Scott Michaels. And welcome back. Our final segment, George Norrie back with you, along with Scott Michaels and Mike Dorsey, as we talk about their work, the Dearly Departed podcast. How did you get that name, you two?
I think it came from my company.
Yeah.
It was, I started Dearly Departed Tours 15 years ago. Actually, I started using the name about 20 years ago when I started selling sort of odd tombstone-based memorabilia, and it just sort of morphed into that. When our first two documentaries were called Dearly Departed Volume 1 and 2, and we just kind of went with it.
Why are people fascinated with celebrity deaths, Scott?
It's a way to hang on to them. I really do think so. It's also, biographies exist. I always went straight to the end of them personally because I think that's the interesting bit. But it's just another aspect. It's the historic aspect, though. You can go to 20 homes where Frank Sinatra lived, but where he died, that's where history happened. And you can actually place them in a physical place. And that's why graveyards are so popular, too, as celebrities' graves.
What was Sinatra's last words? I'm losing?
That was it, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, that's so odd when those sorts of things happen.
It really does. Have you ever covered like the bizarre deaths, like Johnny Roselli or people like that?
Well, the ones that we cover are sort of the most bizarre within Hollywood. I'm not too familiar with the one that you mentioned, but we do try to uncover the ones that are really interesting. For instance, there's a gentleman. This is in one of our documentaries too. This man was Robert Lees. Robert Lees was a screenwriter. He did Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and he did Land of the Giants. And his wife had passed away of cancer. He was blacklisted during the McCarthy era. It was a week after his 90th birthday when a a guy who was jacked up on crystal meth walked into his house, and this is quite gruesome, but grabbed a kitchen knife and took Robert Lee's head off as he was sleeping, and took the head and crossed the back fence and left the head on the neighbor's bed and killed the neighbor with a fireplace poker, then took off in the neighbor's Mercedes, and the next day he was arrested trying to break into Paramount Studios. So, those are the kinds of stories we gravitate towards because they're so outrageous, they're so ridiculous, and just you couldn't make it up. I think screenwriters try to make stories like that up.
No, you're right. You're right about that. Let's take some final calls here. We'll go to Mike in Colorado to get us started. Michael, go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Thank you, Mike.
I had a couple questions for you guys. I really enjoyed the show tonight. The first of which being, I wanted to ask you about the Holmby Hills home that Michael Jackson died in. That house has been rumored to be haunted by many people, and there's been lots of sightings of ghosts. And also, I wanted to get your guys' take on the Natalie Wood death with Robert Blake. And thanks for taking my call, George.
Okay, you're very welcome. Okay, first of all, the Michael Jackson home.
Oh, he died on right off Sunset Boulevard in Carrollwood, and he was renting the house. I think Christian Audiger was the owner of the house, and Jackson was paying $100,000 a month rent or something.
A month?
Like that.
Jeez.
Yeah.
He has a huge mansion in a prime spot.
Yeah, right on Sunset Boulevard. So, as far as if there is any Jackson haunting over there, it would probably, if he is dead, and he probably is. I just like to go to that little weirdo sort of conspiracy theory, but if he is dead, I can understand why he might hang around there because it was quick, it was very sudden, unexpected, and I think he might be a very confused individual. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was still lingering around in that house.
And what about the Natalie Wood situation? Anybody follow that?
Sure. Yeah, that's it's right up our alley. Now, I do think that if Natalie Wood, I think the only thing that may have maliciously happened that night, personally, is that maybe somebody didn't call the police. Maybe somebody said, oh, God, maybe she'll shut up now, and she just took off. Because it was a messy, boozy night, and they were fighting, and it was just, it sounds like a nightmare, really, to have been on that ship. Now, Natalie Wood was afraid of the water. However, they owned a yacht, and they went on the yacht a lot. So it wasn't like she was petrified to be in the water. But there are a lot of questions about surrounding the details. But I do think if there was anyone with guilty of anything, I personally think it would have been negligence.
Next up, let's go to Jersey Doug in New Jersey. Hey, Douglas, go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. Scott, a great show. And once again, George, it's great to speak with you.
Thank you, George.
I was curious about either in the tour or in the book, do you go to or speak about maybe like where Vic Hartman met Phil Hartman met his tragic death with his wife with the shooting and suicide, or Phil Spector's house where he took the life of that actress, or Vic Moreau where he died on the set for The Twilight Zone along with a child.
Oh, that was a helicopter accident.
Right. And the Chateau Memoir, where Joe Belushi had actually died.
Any of those cases, Scotty?
Bungalow 3, where Belushi died at the Chateau Marmont, is definitely on the tour. Phil Spector was murdered, Lana Clarkson in Alhambra, which is about 30 miles from here. Now, the Vic Morrow thing is condominiums now, I believe. It was a motorcycle dirt bike racing park at the time when they filmed the Twilight Zone movie there, and Vic and the two young actors were killed in a helicopter accident. That's now a condominium park, I think. And the last one, I don't remember.
Not Spector. What was the other one?
What was your last one, Jersey?
That was about Phil Spector.
Phil Hartman. Yeah, Phil Hartman was the other one. That happened in Encino. We did have an anniversary dinner there on the anniversary of Phil's death. We do that occasionally, not celebrating. It's our way of acknowledging, so people are not forgot. And we did a little candlelight walk over to the house. We had dinner at Buca di Beppo where Bryn had margarita margaritas that night. But yeah, it's our way. We do that occasionally, like we do on the anniversary of the Tate murders. We go to the restaurant and take a walk up to the house where the house was. It's just I don't know. It's an odd tradition that we do.
Phil Spector is going to be 80 years old in December, and he's still incarcerated.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be getting out. I don't think so.
And Scott and I went out to his house for one of our documentaries years ago, and I think it's called the Pyrenees Castle, and that really is what it's like. It's like a giant castle on top of a hill surrounded by. It's like something in medieval times almost. It's surrounded by a bunch of small little houses, and then there's this giant mansion, surrounded by a wall at the top of this mountain almost. It's a really strange place.
Next up, let's go to Joseph in San Diego, California. Hi, Joseph.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking my call. I'm going to try to line up 3 short questions. One was the Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain situation. Do you think that maybe Courtney might have just gone off and shot in a rage? Maybe they had a fight, blew him up. That was one question. And then did I don't know if to go to Brian Jones and Mick Jagger, did they fight, and did Mick have Brian killed that night in the pool? And then those 2 questions, and then I have one story about.
All right, let's hold on for that. Any one of you want to take a stab at those questions?
Yeah, the Kurt Cobain one is one I followed pretty closely, and I know Nick Broomfield put a documentary out years ago called Kurt and Courtney, which tried to push that, the theory that Courtney Love had him killed and tried to hire somebody to do it. And then more recently, somebody put a documentary out kind of about that. I personally don't believe it. I believe he killed himself. I don't know that Courtney Love did much to stop it from happening, or if she even could have. But I don't know. I think that was suicide. And then Scott can maybe talk about the other one.
One question, and then this quick story. What about the Jimi Hendrix? He possibly may have been drugged by a gang and poured wine down, because he had wine all over him, not just from vomiting, but he could have been killed by a gang.
There's a theory that the ambulance people had something to do with it. Monica, I forget what her name was, his girlfriend at the time. I'm usually the guy that goes straight to the first explanation when the first responders are there in their own reports. It just seems to be the easiest thing and usually the most honest thing. It's in retrospect things change and the more the stories sort of blow up. But the Brian Jones thing is another one that it's curious, because certainly Mick Jagger and Brian Jones had a hugely rocky relationship. And there's one theory that it was just a miffed workman who had something to do with Brian Jones drowning him. I think there's been at least one deathbed confession. So people don't like to go to the simplest explanation for when it comes to their heroes passing away, and I'm not saying it's unfounded. I usually just go for the first explanation.
And Joseph, you had a story. Go ahead.
Story, and maybe you have some reflection. I heard a story. I went to India for 10 years. I was in India, and I was talking to a gentleman who was also American for the pilgrimage in India, and he said that he heard this story quite confident that Morrison wanted out. There was no coroner's report. They had a crypt no one could get into. He got on the America's Express. He went to India where he could get free meals from any vegetarian temple. He got out, and he probably died there. He's probably dead now. But he said he knew he had known people that had seen Morrison in India. And I don't know if that's true or not.
I got to go with.
When they did the investigation in Paris, they didn't do an autopsy, but they didn't have to because there wasn't anything really suspicious about his death. The French authorities did proceed through all the legal channels that they were supposed to, and it all seems like it was very in the dark of night, and he was taken to a place and buried at nighttime, and no one saw his corpse, but people did see his body, and I would like to think, because it's a great story and it'd be a great ending if Morrison was alive, but I'm pretty confident that he's not.
I mean, people just want to hang on to these superstars and just not let them go.
Right. Yeah, it's true, and that's I guess we're all guilty of that. Mike and I with our documentaries, and me with my museum and my tours.
Same thing.
Worship, and
I would love just once for one of them to pop up, like Tupac or somebody. I would love for it to be true one time.
Yeah.
out of the 100.
I think it was Suge Knight's son that has got the rumor going out about Tupac being alive.
Yeah, and the people try to use it to get publicity for various things that they're doing, and I think that's kind of what that was.
Arn is with us in Oklahoma City. Welcome to the program, Arn. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
This is more of a supernatural question. There's a movie called Return to Babylon. It was filmed in the last decade or so, and there's some story behind it, but it was a film that's a silent movie in black and white, and they're reenacting film stars from the 20s and 30s. But there's reports of the people on there, the actors, their images morphing into demonic characters. Do you all know anything about that?
No, but I'm going to go look it up right away. That sounds fantastic. Wow.
Yeah, Wikipedia says it's a 2013 black and white silent film about the silent movie era.
Huh. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Was that not too long ago either? Not too long ago at all. Let's go to Jack in Los Angeles. Jack, let's squeeze you in. Go ahead.
Hey, hi. It's a small world. I lived at 141 South Carrollwood. My brother got hired there in '83 to be a estate caretaker for a rich Arab, and he also owned the house next door, which was a 10060 Sunset Boulevard, which was the house that Esther Williams had built. And then the other one on that cul-de-sac was the Jayne Mansfield home in pink with the heart-shaped pool.
Jeez.
And like you guys were talking about the John Benet Ramsey thing, and you get this feeling of like a menace or something about stuff. We didn't know anything about the place when we started working there. We found out later on about Joseph Schenck and William Kent and Tony Curtis and Sonny and Cher, Esther Williams and Jayne Mansfield, and those places, all three of them were haunted to hell. And I remember the tour buses used to come, on a regular basis. And then when it got sold in 2003, the new owner tore down two of the houses and blocked that street off.
That's right. Yeah, Rudy Valley lived in the house, and Jayne Mansfield ended up buying it and turned it into what was known as the Pink Palace with the heart-shaped swimming pool. And since you were there, you might remember there were these huge, enormous wrought iron gates, and above the gates were in wrought iron was the address, was Jayne's address, 10,100 Sunset Boulevard, and we have those gates actually, the ones that Jayne would drive through every day.
Jeez.
We have those in our shop as well.
Small
and
world.
Jayne did haunt the house. Engelbert Humperdinck owned that house for decades afterwards, and said that he saw Jayne many times.
Both of you, thank you for being on the program. The clock has got us. DearlyDepartedPod.com. That's their website. We'll be back with more in the future.